Thank you all for coming. This is a terrific day, and we welcome you all. My name is Dan Chenok. I am the Vice Chair for the Industry Advisory Council and the Executive Director for the IBM Center for the Business of Government. I'd like to formally welcome you this morning to the 2013 Shared Services Forum that's being hosted by the American Council for Technology and Industry Advisory Council, affectionately known as ACT-IAC. For those of you that are not familiar with ACT-IAC, it's a relatively unique organization. It has a government executive committee that is chaired by Rick Holgate, who will be here, who is the CIO of the ATF at the Justice Department. And that executive committee and the government members of the ACT are advised by the Industry Advisory Council, which is itself governed by an industry executive committee, which is chaired by Jim Williams, who is familiar to many of you as a longtime former executive in government, and now will be here with us later today as the chair of the Industry Advisory Council. ACT-IAC's mission is to help use information technology and identify ways that technology can help drive mission performance, effectiveness, and efficiency in government in many different ways. And today's topic of shared services is certainly one such area that ACT-IAC has been looking at. You'll hear a lot about it today, and you'll continue to hear about it after today, and you'll hear about the ongoing discussion and dialogue that we'll look to host after that. Our goal today is really to engage you in government and industry, and there's a good mix of government and industry here. Probably about a little bit more than 50% of you are with the government, and so we are very grateful that you're here today. To look at best practices in shared services transitions. What are critical success factors in setting up, buying, delivering shared services, operating in that environment, and leveraging public-private shared services partnerships. And you'll see and have a chance to discuss with a number of the exhibitors in the hallway on any and all of those questions. We hope to provide a venue today of education. For those of you that are looking for education credits, ACT-IAC has set up a process for awarding those types of credits for you, providing you with information on some of the challenges that exist in this important issue and in this important area. Our content today will really focus on innovations and priorities, government priorities, as these issues are woven. I would note that I did have a career in government before my time in industry at the Office of Management and Budget primarily. And over a decade ago, as an OMB executive, I was part of the team that introduced a lot of the shared services infrastructure. And it's really a tremendous credit to all of you, to the leaders that are here today speaking, and to the larger government community as to how much progress has been made over the last 10 years, including, of course, the administration's Shared First initiative and all of the issues that we'll be discussing today. So it's really a testament to the progress that's been made over the last decade. Before getting into the agenda, I wanted to introduce my colleague on the ACT Executive Committee, Mike Howell, who is the Deputy Program Manager with the Information Sharing Environment, who will talk a little bit more about the content of today and the topic at hand. Mike?
Thank you, Dan, and welcome to all of you for coming today to discuss this important topic. So looking back a little bit, it's interesting to me that the government's been using shared service approaches for quite a few years. I note in the program for today that the Interior Business Center describes doing such business for over 30 years. And so many of those early efforts were related to back office kinds of service, finance, personnel management, and that sort of thing. Over a decade ago, as Dan described, the OMB established 24 e-government initiatives and 9 lines of business. And they were really focused on consolidating what were apparently redundant and maybe less than efficient approaches to business across multiple agencies, with the notion that economy of scale could drive out some efficiencies. And following Dan and the initiation of those, I worked at OMB for several years, where I was responsible for overseeing those activities and reporting annually to the Congress on how they were going. And so I learned a lot about the challenges that agencies faced, both as providers and as consumers of shared services. And coming around to why are we here today then? There's a renewed interest in focusing on cutting costs, driving out redundancy, and improving the delivery of services, both in variety and quality. And recent developments in technology are enabling a much richer variety of service offerings, things like cloud, virtualization, ubiquitous networking. But at the same time, fiscal pressures are really causing agencies to take a hard look and reevaluate the opportunities for using shared service approaches to combine both the cost-cutting activities and service delivery efforts they want to address. So the Federal CIO Council recognized this and established a shared services subcommittee. We have some leadership from them today in this program. And they've made significant progress over the course of the last year. You'll get to hear more and see more about that during today's program. And then as a result of that, the American Council for Technology and the Industry Advisory Council leadership recognized the importance of this issue earlier this year, and we worked with OMB and the Federal CIO Council and the Shared Service Subcommittee to put together today's program. So it's a good news, bad news story. Shared services has the potential, emphasize potential, to deliver better performance and lower costs. But it also presents some risks and challenges. It's not an easy, automatic slam dunk. If they're managed well, good things can ensue. We've seen case studies and real empiric evidence of the potential to deliver with shared services. But we've also seen some very messy, tricky problems emerge across the federal government in trying to use this approach. And I would emphasize that this is especially true in the construct of the federal government. Things that work well in the private sector or more easily in the private sector run into some really thorny issues when you try to translate them into the federal environment. The federal structure of authorities, we always hear about the stovepipes. Authorities, appropriations, and responsibilities are built to do this. And when you want to do this, it can get really hard really fast. There's a lack of good cost and performance metrics, both on current programs and on future options to make good decisions. There's inconsistent policies and procedures between agencies that we get really interesting, prolonged conversations between our lawyers on how we're going to work together. But we don't act like we're necessarily all on the same team. There's some really thorny problems in reliably obtaining money from the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue and then executing those funds in a timely manner. If you were ever trying to run a business and had to ask for what you want 3 years ahead of time, maybe get part of it 3 years later, and wait, no, not the beginning of 3 years later, the end of 3 years later, be asked to do 12 months worth of work in about 3 months. All of those kinds of things can really impede any kind of business viability and a business model for executing shared services. If you're a provider, anybody in here a service provider? I'd really be interested in what the incentives are for you to do that. In the federal construct, it's been a really significant challenge, other than the goodness of your own hearts, to incentivize provisioning other organizations in the face of these challenges. And then the consumers, the service consumers look at it and say, well, I don't necessarily have as much competition and choice as I want, and I don't necessarily get the service levels and the requirements met that I need. So all of this is the kind of complex set of issues that we want to take a look at today. One of the key observations we're going to look into a little later in the day is the successful shared services offerings have something in common, and that is that the disciplines necessary to support them, the program managers, IT, finance, budget and acquisition in particular, and the policymakers and performance management, all need to come together under the project and program management concept of integrated teams. It doesn't help if they're fragmented and fractured and blaming each other for why it's not working. Synergy between those disciplines is essential, and we're going to hear from a panel later today about that. So we look forward to hearing from the knowledgeable and experienced people from both the public and private sector about their experiences, their lessons learned, how they've coped with those challenges and what they see as opportunities for the future. And I encourage all of you involved in this business to really take advantage of the people that are going to be here today. There's a wealth of institutional knowledge and experience that will be available to you. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dan.
Thanks, Mike. And just a few logistics and a look at the program before we get to our opening plenary speaker. The agenda today you have in your programs. Just to briefly run through it, we'll have a terrific opening plenary right after a plenary panel after our speaker. And then after a break, where you'll be able to visit with some of the exhibitors who are outside the shared service centers, who are here, who are talking about the services that they provide. We hope that you'll interact with them periodically throughout the day during breaks. And then looking ahead at the agenda, right after lunch, there will be a half an hour where it's really just dedicated to your time going around, talking with the shared service centers about their challenges, your needs, your challenges, and engaging in conversation with them. In between, we'll have a group of breakout sessions. The 3 rooms for the breakouts are right across the hall. You have those in your panels. We have not asked you to sign up in advance, so feel free to use chaos theory and spread across all the 3 rooms. And I'm sure that in any of the rooms you'll have a terrific set of speakers to talk about what it means to sell shared services, what it means to make the business case for shared services, how do you operate them, very significant challenges like that. Afterwards, we will come back in and before our lunch plenary, which is listed in your program, you'll have a chance to see a demo of the Federal Shared Services Catalog, affectionately known as Uncle Sam's List. And we have terrific speakers, Scott Bernard and Richard Warren, who will take us through that demonstration. That'll be right after you pick up your box lunch outside and bring it back in. And then after that, we'll have a terrific plenary panel that's being moderated by Joe Klimovitz, the CIO at NOAA, and he'll introduce those speakers. Then finally, after the break, when you'll have a chance at 1:30 to speak to the exhibitors, don't go away, come back in, because we have a rare treat. We have the deputy leaders of all of the management functions across the CXO organizations at the Office of Management and Budget as our closing panel. And they really are a tremendous group of people. I know many of you have gotten to work with them. And it's not often that they speak together, so we have a real significant opportunity to engage in dialogue with the leadership at OMB before we close the session at 3:30. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Those of you that are speaking, a special thanks to you. Thanks, of course, to the shared service centers who have come to exhibit and discuss with you their offerings. Especially thanks to the planning committee with ACT-IAC. All of them have worked very hard, and the ACT-IAC staff, in making this day possible. And finally, thanks to the CIO Council Shared Services Subcommittee, led by Joe Klimovitz and John Larson at EPA, who have been our partners through this entire venture, and their colleague, Scott Bernard, the chief architect at OMB, and of course, Richard Ward, who I introduced earlier. All of those individuals, from a good number of them, will be here today, and we look forward to an engaging dialogue. And then, of course, thanks to our very generous corporate sponsors, Accenture, Booz Allen, and HP, who you can read about in the program and who you'll have a chance to interact with during the day as well. If anybody needs to use a restroom, it's outside and to the right. As I mentioned, there will be breaks built in if you feel the need to stretch. We're an informal group. Please go ahead and do so. There's wireless here. For those of you that need it in the program, it says how to access the wireless event. And with that, Robert, I think we're good in terms of logistics. And I'd like to move on to the introduction of our opening speaker, who has been very generous to join us here today. Bernie Kluger, who is the Performance Improvement Officer with the Office of Personnel Management, and has a deep experience in leading the HR community in shared services and working with OMB and the other CXO communities in making this a success. And Bernie will have a number of remarks and will, I know, entertain some questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce Bernie.
Good morning. My name is Bernie Kluger. I'm Performance Improvement Officer at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm both humbled and honored to be speaking in front of this group on behalf of the Office of Personnel Management and shared services in general. I also need to apologize up front. I may be slightly distracted. Don Arnold, could you just wave your arms for a second? If he does that again during the speech, make sure I pay attention to. My wife's contractions are about 10 minutes and 40 seconds, and the doctor said, get out of the house and let her relax. So this is, I'm here for my wife, not really for you guys, to just give her a chance to relax. So So after that raw attack at your sympathies, I did want to talk a little bit about some of the harder things, which is shared services in the federal context. Looking around the audience today, I see a lot of my colleagues and partners, people who've been working for really your entire careers to make this possible. What I'll be doing today is really talking about three separate ideas. One is a celebration of the work of the shared service centers, both the buyers and the sellers of shared services over the past years. Second, I'll be talking a little bit of a state of the world or the view from OPM. It's a narrow view, it's just the view from the human capital side. I know there are many other lines of business, but that's the area I know, so we'll be looking at that. And then third, there'll be a bit of a call to action and even some homework. I heard there's 0.6 credits, so I'll be presenting 3 questions for you to work on during the break. You only have to do 2 of them to get your 0.6 credits, so and the other 60th of a 100th we'll figure out later. But a little bit about myself. I mentioned I was Deputy Performance Improvement Officer at OPM. That means I'm a GIPRA geek. It also means I'm an HR geek, and it means I'm a techie. You don't have to be a techie geek. That just, I guess, comes with it. So I'll be excited about all 3 of those topics today: GIPRA, performance. I'll be excited about human capital, and I'll be excited about technology stuff too. But of course, there's the reason why I'm here today, and that is the mission of our organizations. When I go to work in the morning, what I'm excited about isn't just the work of OPM, but the work we do at the Office of Personnel Management and across shared services to address the missions of our organizations. Whether it's fighting a wildland fire, Indian health, Mohawk guy, whatever it is he does. We're very excited about the Pathways program, which gave him this opportunity to become famous. So that's the work we do at OPM, and I believe is at the core of why shared services matter in the federal government. I'll be talking a bit more about that as we go on. So a little bit about where I come from the Office of Personnel Management. I like to think we're the oldest shared services entity in the federal government. Going back to Teddy Roosevelt and the formation of the civil service, the centralization of testing and certification, the idea that if we allowed one agency to focus on a task, a challenge that was shared across the federal government, we could do it well, we could do it better, and the government could then do its work out in the public much more effectively. So I like to say we are the oldest line of business in the federal government. But really our story starts really around 2002, 2003 with eGov. We talked a bit about authorities. Thank you, Michael. We can't do any of this without our hierarchy of authorities. And it's a wonderful success story. We've gone from having hundreds of providers of payroll services. Literally, we talked today about how we took 24 agencies and brought it down to just 4 payroll providers, but really we're talking about creating the concept of payroll, because each of those providers had print shops and audit shops and filing shops, doing all of the different parts of payroll. Well, we're now down to 5 providers. When we look at human resources, human capital management, we now have personnel processing brought down to just a handful of providers. We're looking at a real success here in the federal government. We're seeing the same successes, whether it's geospatial, financial, across the board. So I'm excited to be part of, and really humbled to be part of a program at OPM that's now entering its 2nd decade. And we've been spending a lot of time thinking about what that 2nd decade challenge will look like, and over the fall and spring you'll be hearing more about that. So what does that mean? Well, part of the goal was very simple when we set out to have a payroll shared service program at OPM. We were going to reduce the number of people involved in a task so agencies could focus on their mission, and in doing so, we'd reduce cost. And we do a benchmarking study every couple years. Agencies are very generous in providing us this data, and we're doing really well. We are below industry benchmarks compared to private sector. We're doing well against government benchmarks, and we're doing well against our own performance year on year. We provide a high quality service. People get paid, they get paid on time, and it's really a success. We may even be announcing some other opportunities for savings just in the payroll area in the next few months. We're just very excited about that. And that's the work of people here in the room. I see we've got IBC. I think we've got all the payroll centers here in the room today. Just very excited to have you here and appreciate the work you've all done. So a little bit about where we're going next. That's the story of the HR line of business, a decade of work, a decade of collaboration between private and public sector. And a focus on, among all things, reducing cost and consistency. So we've reached what I sometimes call the Model T stage, and that's a really good place to be, actually. I don't mean that negatively. We've gotten to the point where you can have any car you want, any color you want, as long as it's black. In this case, your employees are going to get paid. They're going to get paid correctly, and they're going to be paid on time. We've also done really well on consistency, and then third, we've gotten really good at building. As government, we're good at building big things. So we'll get to the pizza tracker in a minute. We've talked about cost, we talked about consistency, and we talked about building. What I'll be talking a little bit about in the next few minutes I have with you, though, are about taking each of those categories, cost, consistency, and building big things, to the next level. The question is, if we're good at cost, can we also get good at impact on mission? And I started talking in the beginning about why I go to work in the morning, which is the focus on mission. We talked a bit about consistency. Well, then the question becomes, can we not just be consistent, but can we also be personal? Can we connect with the individual and diverse needs of the federal worker in the federal workplace, of our very diverse missions? And then last, we can build Hoover Dam, we can build wonderful structures that will last and continue to last, but can we, as shared service providers, sustain innovation and variety? And I'll be talking a little bit about that as well, and some of the things that have me excited about what I see when I look at each of the shared service centers that are represented here today and those that aren't. So what do I mean? Well, my standard here, of course, I went to a group of experts in my home. We had half a dozen 6-year-olds over for pizza, and I asked, where do you guys want to get pizza? And they all said Domino's. So why do you want to go to Domino's? I assumed it's because there's more sugar content than any other tomato sauce in the market. That was true, but also it was the pizza tracker. They love the pizza tracker, and we spent about 20 minutes discussing. Again, this is not an endorsement of or but just an example, something in our economy. So do we go with the rock band pizza tracker or the baseball pizza tracker? So it was highly personal. It was exciting. It was interesting to them, and we could track the pizza, and that was really fun. The thing that surprised me, though, is my kid doesn't like cheese, and what we usually do is we peel the cheese off. And right when the thing hit that little, your pizza's being made, I got a phone call, and it was from the local Domino's. I always thought this thing was fake, by the way. I thought it was just like a flash animation. The guy called and says, "Are you sure you don't want cheese?" And I thought, wow, this must be Amazon. This is really cool. I said, no, yeah, we really don't want cheese. And, you know, the kids are jumping in and I said, no cheese, no cheese. So, and then the tracker went to the next thing when I hung up. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And then I thought about what we are doing in our work as shared service providers and leaders. Are we providing that level of personalization? And, you know, we know our employees who are trying to honor and respect aren't looking for rock band versus baseball, but they do want to know where is my retirement payment in the process. For all of us here who manage and employ, and this is a group of leaders, how far along is my cert in the process? How many people are coming in on the application that I have in USA Jobs? So I'm putting OPM at the center of this because we are responsible for many of those services, but also the shared service endeavor in general. We've built low-cost, consistent, credible services, but to what extent are we meeting the local and specific needs? To what extent are we taking advantage of the technologies that are available to us and the structures we've built to provide that level of personalization? Again, I'm not talking about whether we go baseball or rock band, but rather, are we delivering a personalized experience that delights and that allows people to focus on the mission. At the end of the day, that's really all we're talking about here. So moving on a bit, we've got Hoover Dam. We're really good at building big things. One of the wonderful experiences I got in being a part of the Department of Interior is getting to know the people at Bureau of Reclamation who build dams and maintain these dams with centuries as their time frame. These are things that last and provide incredibly low-cost services, consistent services to enormous populations. I believe that the shared service programs have made those kinds of strides in terms of what we've done, what you've done as shared service providers to allow people to focus on mission. So the question is, can we iterate? And I thought I'd start with this question of innovation and iteration. You know, can we just build, but can we improve? With a story from my own agency, from OPM. This is not the headline any of us wanted to wake up to see in October of 2011. We had taken an incredible risk to move USA Jobs to a federal platform. And you may remember it was a bumpy ride. Comments on Facebook became media stories. So social media was no longer an option, it was actually our driver at that point. Thank goodness there wasn't an unlike button, because people were planning to invent it for us. So luckily for our agency, we had a staff that learned on the fly how to manage social media. But it wasn't just a communications effort. We set up a war room with a dedicated team working 24/7 to respond to comments. But what was unique and different, what I am proud of in my agency, is that we then had a direct connection, a daily call, where the comments on Facebook were immediately handed off and prioritized with our development team in Macon. And that team developed a work plan and implemented those changes in real time into the system. So we were evolving the system on a daily basis. Since then, we've actually institutionalized that. We built an executive steering committee, and we go through now an agile release cycle. I think we even have a couple representatives of the executive committee here in the room. So by necessity, we formed an agile approach, and now USA Jobs, I'm proud to say, is a liked service. We got a few likes, which I'm really proud of. But in addition to that, in our first 10 months after launch, we processed 12.5 million applications. We're not in the paper, which for my job is very important. And I really wish they'd write that story too, but that's okay. But we were able to turn around a root problem and in the end, change the way a shared service function operates and are now poised to deliver very different kind of service to both the public, but also to our agency partners who contribute to USA Jobs. I'm just very excited about this. The question is, can we do that with all of our shared services? Can we move without a crisis? Can we move into a mode where we're continuously iterating and changing and improving our services? So going back to mission, I'd said before we've been focused on cost. We've been focused on consistency and on building, and now we've got to move towards impact, towards connecting and individualizing the experience, and finally, sustaining innovation. And I point to the works of the PMA, the President's Management Agenda, which is currently in development, and there was a wonderful announcement about that, Presidential Innovation Fellows. These are all resources that we should be thinking about and tapping. But I'm not just here to say these are 3 areas where we should go. What I'd like to do in my final comments is talk a bit about some of the tools that are available to you, because Scott asked me to, so I'll be doing that. Thank you, Dr. Bernard. But also some of the resources here in the room, and that's where the homework assignment comes in. So don't need your pens yet, but just a little bit about the resources that are available to you. Dr. Bernard will be talking later about Uncle Sam's List, which is an internal community within the max.gov internal government collaboration site. Basically, it's Craigslist, where agencies are putting forward the services they have. This is really exciting to us, because it's not just the list of mandated services, the ones where we had steering committees and mandates and M memos and A memos, but ones that agencies said, hey, I got a service that's pretty good. And when you go to Uncle Sam's List, and I encourage you to do so if you're in federal service, check it out. And if you aren't, ask a friend to log in. I didn't say that. And see what's there, because it's a wonderful list of resources that are not just coming from shared service providers, but from just agencies that are, as Michael pointed out, opening up their services without the incentives, the formal incentives, or just offering it up as public servants. There is an active shared services subcommittee for each of the lines of business. We encourage you, send your best people. I know LOB gets the best people from each agency, HR LOB, but send your best people. There's a lot happening in those meetings and those subcommittees, but also a shout out to the shared service centers. Each of them have very active steering committees that meet with their customer agencies, and they really look to those committees. So participate, be active. There is an IT shared services implementation guide as well as the shared first policy. It's there in the Exhibit 300 language, the A11 guidance. There's real guidance there in terms of the authority you have as a shared service center, the authorities you have as a CIO within the CIO's office, or the authorities you have as a buyer of services to do a lot. There's a lot of authority that OMB has given you to act nimbly in this area, to work around, or I should say work within the budget constraints to make interesting things happen. The language is all there. In fact, one of the things I thought I would do as soon as I came into this role is, we're going to fix A11. And I looked, it's like, that's all there already. So it's there, and you've got people like your friends at OMB, Dr. Bernard, and other leaders who can help you find that language if you need it during this budget season. So I wanted to share a little bit about those tools. Also, portfolio stat. When the CIO goes around to do portfolio stat, you've got the whole leadership team there. That's the time to tee up those services, whether you're on the selling side or the buying side. You've got friends in eGov who are going to help you with that. So that was the shout out to some of the things we have. What I also want to do is throw out, I said, 3 questions to think about, to ask about. And this, again, this is going to be part of your continuation credit. Dan will be collecting these at the end of the day today. The first question is, when you run into someone, whether they're wearing a IBC or an NFC or a NASA tag or PSC tag, ask them in what ways they're a buyer or provider of shared services. Because you'll find that it is an interconnected web of services. We're reselling each other's services, we're recombining each other's services. It's a very dynamic space. Again, going back to the 6-year-old model, it's a Lego set, and we're all building these Legos different ways. So please ask that question. The second question I'd like you to ask is, what services do you have that you're not currently offering, but you think you could be offering? Every shared service center, but also every buyer of shared services, has some neat stuff. And some of the most interesting things that the SSCs, SSPs are selling today actually came from their customers. There's a lot of exchange going on. So if you've got something neat, you've got Uncle Sam's list, but we're looking for that next generation of services that we can put out there and develop. And I guess third is, ask what the needs are, but frame it in terms of the mission. And that's why we come to work in the morning. That's why we're here. What is it your service does? What is it that my service, that I need from a service that I'm going to buy, that's going to drive the mission? In times of tight financial constraint, that's really what it's going to come down to across the board, because reducing cost is just going to be a race to the bottom. It's also, what are you doing for the mission of the organization? Ask that question today, please. Again, Dan will be taking notes. It's a question I ask when I come to work in the morning. It's why I love the work I do, why I love being at OPM, and again, why I'm really honored to be here today. Don, did I make it? I'm good. Okay. Are we, we're good? So we do have a little time for any questions or comments. If there are any thoughts here, I do have my 3 homework questions that I put out there. Of course, you can use that as an opportunity to ask the audience as well. So I'll just pause for a moment.
Bring my own, Dan. Just kidding.
Good morning.
Thank you. You're not getting me yet. Yeah, now? 1, 2. There we go. Jason Miller, Federal News Radio. Can't resist the question. Since you opened the door, what's the new services you're going to tell us about in a couple months? It's a loaded question. I realize that, but you know.
And I guess I'm going to come back with the answer. That's really going to be determined by the shared services community here in the room. So it's definitely a question you should be asking every one of the shared service providers here in the room. And not just, but everyone here, we should be asking, what's coming around the corner? Because there are some really exciting things that the SSPs are putting together. Our role at OPM is to make sure that there is a clear runway, that as the LOB, those services get the attention, get the light that they need, they get the oxygen they need, the care and feeding to hit the market. And that the case is being made, I guess the air cover, that they are aligned with mission. And that's what I'm really focused on. And it may sound a little coy, but I think it gives a sense of where I'm focused, is providing the light, the care, the feeding, and the structure that may not have been there as strongly as it's been in recent years.
Hi, Linda Garcia.
Good morning, Linda.
An agency that I work with, they not only are providing shared services, but they also provide like widgets that allow users to go out and get common types of things that they need. And I wonder if that's something that you're seeing. So it's not a full-blown application, but it's like a service or a connection to like locations or map places or zip codes.
I think we're going to see a lot of growth there, and that's an area that we're going to be encouraging. I use the Hoover Dam example with a couple thoughts in mind. When you talk to the guys at Reclamation, they're not thinking about building the next dam. What they're thinking about is smart grid. They're thinking about adding small generating capacity on demand across the grid, whether that's wind or power. Okay, so to extend the metaphor, the first generation was focused on big systems. We were looking at combining into scale, to getting to scale in payroll, getting to scale in personnel processing or document management through EOPF. But now we've got to focus on where we're going to support innovation. So I'm really excited about that kind of widget idea in two ways. One, those are the empty spaces that the big approach isn't solving. But second, we've got to make room for innovation across the grid of services that we're providing. So I'm very excited about those opportunities, and I think the LOB needs to take responsibility to provide that care and feeding to make that happen. I'm very pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I actually have sort of a question that's a bit of a segue.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
First of all, thank you, Bernie, for those tremendous remarks. So in our next panel, we'll have a representative of each of the CXO communities. And part of the theme of the day is really how can the CIO, CFO, acquisition, and HR communities work together to make shared services a success. From your perspective, as one of the leaders of those communities, how do you see that working across the communities? And what challenges and questions would you have for the panel coming up?
So these are definitely co-conspirators in the shared services realm, and I think what we've got to focus on is that coordination on mission. Coordination, also the four parts they represent, they're the Fantastic Four. So you've got to get your contracts rationalized and get scale on contracts. You've got to get your GIPRA rationalized and aligned with shared services. So we've got the GIPRA piece and the performance goals piece. So if you're going to be investing in a shared service technology with Lisa, it better have a GIPRA component on mission. Again, that's opinion here, that for Dustin. And then going across to the last piece, it's got to make financial sense. There's got to be an investment strategy in place for Norm. So the four of them together are a powerhouse, and I think that as shared service providers, working with them as a group and looking at our work strategically is an advantage. It's not a divide and conquer. It's sum greater than the parts with those four. And they really are true believers.